She returned a lost child in the snow, trembling and half-frozen herself, and the father's first words, spoken in a voice that seemed to crack the world open, were, "You look just like her." Clara didn't know that saving this little girl from the blizzard would lead her into the arms of a man who'd been waiting 3 years for a ghost to come back to life. Earlier that evening, the storm warnings had been all over the news, but Clara Bennett had ignored them. She needed the overtime shift at Boston General's laundry facility, needed the $87 that would keep the heat on in her studio apartment for 1 more week, needed to add another small brick to the wall of savings that might someday pay for the nursing certification exam. So she'd gone in, sorted mountains of hospital linens that smelled of bleach and sickness, folded surgical gowns with careful precision, pressed sheets until her shoulders ached and her fingers cramped. When her supervisor finally told her to go home, it was already dark. The snow had started to fall, not gently, not like a holiday card. It fell in thick, violent curtains that turned the parking lot into a white void. Clara wrapped her thin coat tighter around her frame and stepped into the storm. Her boots, bought second-hand 3 winters ago, had cracks in the soles. Cold water seeped through within minutes. She kept her head down, counted her steps. 12 blocks to the bus stop, another 40-minute ride to her neighborhood. She could do this. She'd done harder things. But then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to wind or traffic or the muffled chaos of a city in a blizzard. Crying, small, desperate, barely audible over the howl of the storm. Clara stopped, turned, saw nothing but white. She took 3 steps toward an alley between a closed diner and a medical supply warehouse. The crying grew louder, and there, behind a dumpster, pressed against the brick wall like a small animal trying to disappear, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. She wore a pink winter coat that was too thin for this weather, and the hood had fallen back, exposing brown curls plastered to her pale cheeks. Her lips had a bluish tint. In her arms she clutched a stuffed rabbit that looked as soaked and miserable as she did. Clara dropped to her knees in the snow. "Sweetheart," she said, voice shaking. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here?" The little girl looked up with hazel eyes so wide and terrified that Clara's heart cracked clean through. My babysitter said to wait. She said she'd be right back." "How long ago?" The girl's lower lip trembled. "I don't know. A long time. The sky was still light." That had been hours ago. Clara looked around. The alley was empty. The street was empty. No frantic parent, no babysitter returning. Just a child left behind in a storm that could kill her. "Okay," Clara said, forcing calm into her voice. "Okay, we're going to get you somewhere warm. What's your name?" "Ruby." "Ruby? That's a beautiful name. I'm Clara." She started to unbutton her coat. "I'm going to wrap you up, and we're going to find your home. Can you tell me where you live?" Ruby shook her head. "I don't know the dress." "The address?" A small nod. Clara bit her lip, looked at the child shivering violently in front of her, looked at the storm that showed no sign of stopping. She pulled off her coat and wrapped it around Ruby's small body, then scooped the girl into her arms. Ruby weighed almost nothing. She was so cold that Clara could feel it through her uniform scrubs. The stuffed rabbit dangled from Ruby's grip, one ear dragging in the snow. "Hold on to me," Clara whispered. "Hold on tight." She started walking, not toward the bus stop, not toward home. She had no idea where she was going, but she couldn't just leave Ruby at a police station and disappear. Not in this storm, not when the child was already hypothermic. Ruby's backpack. Clara had seen it on the ground. She stopped, turned, grabbed it with her free hand. The wind tried to rip it away. She held tighter. Inside a coffee shop 3 blocks away, she set Ruby down long enough to search the bag. Coloring books, crayons, a juice box, and there, sewn into the lining with careful stitches, a small fabric label. Ruby Prescott, 2847 Beacon Hill Drive. Beacon Hill. Clara's stomach dropped. That was the wealthiest neighborhood in Boston. Old money, massive homes, wrought iron gates, the kind of place where people like Clara only existed to clean or serve. But it didn't matter. Ruby needed to go home. She lifted the child again, pulled up a map on her phone with numb fingers, and started walking. 12 blocks. Straight into the heart of a blizzard. straight into a world she'd never belonged to. Ruby's head rested against Clara's shoulder. "I'm cold," she whispered. "I know, baby, I know. We're almost there." Clara didn't know if that was true. She just kept walking. The wind cut through her scrubs like knives. Her hands had gone numb. Her feet were blocks of ice. But Ruby was getting warmer in her arms, tucked into the coat, and that was all that mattered. She sang as she walked, soft, half-remembered lullabies she'd heard on television as a child. She'd never had a mother to sing them to her, never had anyone to tuck her in or kiss her forehead. But she sang them now for Ruby, and Ruby's shivering began to slow. When Clara finally turned onto Beacon Hill Drive, the houses rose up like fortresses, 3 stories, 4, glowing windows, manicured lawns buried under snow. She checked the address again. The house at the end of the street was the largest, a Victorian mansion with stone columns and tall windows that blazed with golden light. A long driveway curved up to the front door. Clara climbed the steps, her legs shaking with cold and exhaustion. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. The door flew open. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his face a portrait of controlled terror. Dark hair shot through with gray, strong jaw, eyes the color of a forest in shadow. He wore an expensive sweater and slacks, and his hand gripped the doorframe so tightly his knuckles were white. His gaze dropped to the bundle in Clara's arms. "Ruby!" His voice broke on the name. "She's okay," Clara said quickly. "She's cold, but she's okay. I found her." But he wasn't looking at Ruby anymore. He was looking at Clara. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, and then, in a voice that sounded like it was tearing out of his chest, he said, "Natalie?" Clara blinked. No, I'm Clara. I found—" He stepped forward, and the light from inside the house spilled across Clara's face. She saw the exact moment reality reasserted itself, saw the hope drain from his expression, replaced by something worse, confusion, pain. "You look just like her," he whispered. Clara didn't know what to say. She held out Ruby, whose eyes were fluttering open. She was behind a dumpster on 7th Street. She said her babysitter left her. The man took Ruby from her arms with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the wildness in his eyes. He cradled his daughter against his chest, murmuring words Clara couldn't hear. Ruby's small hand came up to pat his cheek. "Daddy," she said sleepily, "the snow angel found me." His jaw tightened. He looked back at Clara, standing on his doorstep in soaked scrubs, shivering so hard her teeth were chattering. "Come inside," he said. Please." His voice cracked. "Please, don't go. Not yet." Clara hesitated. She was freezing. She had no coat. The buses had probably stopped running. And something in this man's face, something broken and desperate, made it impossible to say no. She stepped inside. The warmth hit her like a wall. Her body started shaking harder as it remembered what heat felt like. The man closed the door, still holding Ruby, and gestured toward a living room that looked like something out of a magazine. High ceilings, a fireplace already blazing, furniture that probably cost more than Clara made in a year. "Sit," he said. I'll be right back. I need to get her warm." He disappeared up a curved staircase carrying Ruby. Clara stood in the entryway, dripping melted snow onto marble floors. She shouldn't be here. She should leave, but her legs wouldn't move. On the mantel above the fireplace, there were photographs. Clara's gaze drifted to them. A family. The man, younger, smiling. A little girl who must be Ruby, maybe a year old. And a woman with blonde hair that fell in soft waves, with blue eyes, with a face that could have been Clara's face if Clara had ever had enough to eat, enough sleep, enough joy. Clara's breath caught. The man returned a few minutes later. He'd changed into dry clothes and his hair was damp, like he'd splashed water on his face. He carried a thick blanket and a steaming mug. "Ruby's in bed," he said quietly. "She'll be fine, thanks to you." He held out the mug. "Hot chocolate. You look like you're about to pass out." Clara took it with shaking hands. The warmth seeped into her palms. She didn't drink, just held it. "I'm Ethan," the man said. "Ethan Prescott. Clara Bennett. You saved my daughter's life, Clara. She shook her head. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," His voice was firm. Not anyone. Most people would have walked past, called the police, and kept moving. You carried her 12 blocks through a blizzard. Clara looked down at the mug. She was scared. I couldn't leave her. Ethan was silent for a long moment. When she finally looked up, he was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said at the door. You just—" He stopped, swallowed. "My wife, Natalie. She died 3 years ago. And you look—" He couldn't finish. Clara's heart twisted. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's not your fault." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed habitual. "The babysitter. She had an emergency. Her mother was in an accident. She said she left Ruby with a neighbor, but—" His voice went hard. "Apparently that was a lie. I've been searching for 3 hours. I was about to call the police when you knocked. The babysitter left her alone? In a storm." Ethan's fists clenched. "I trusted her. I trusted her with the most important thing in my world, and she—" He broke off, breathing hard. Clara didn't know what to say. She sipped the hot chocolate. It was rich and sweet and perfect. And she had to fight the urge to cry, because it had been so long since anyone had given her something warm. "Let me call you a car," Ethan said, "to take you home. It's the least I can do. I can take the bus. The buses aren't running. Storm's too bad." He was already pulling out his phone. "Please, let me do this." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to disappear before he looked at her too closely and saw everything she wasn't, everything his wife must have been. But she was so tired, so cold, and the thought of walking back out into that storm made her want to weep. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Ethan made the call. Then he looked at her again, and there was something in his expression that Clara couldn't read, something that looked like wonder and pain tangled together. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Clara nodded. "Why did you do it? Really? You could have just called someone. You didn't have to—" "I was lost once," Clara said softly, "when I was little, and no one came. No one stayed." She looked up at him. "I didn't want her to feel like that." Ethan stared at her, and for the first time since she'd walked through his door, something shifted in his face. The grief was still there, the shock, but underneath it, Clara saw recognition, not because she looked like his wife, because he understood what she'd just said. "The car will be here in 5 minutes," he said quietly. Clara nodded, finished the hot chocolate, let him take the empty mug. When the car arrived, Ethan walked her to the door. He held out her coat, now dry from hanging by the fire. "Thank you," he said, "for bringing her home." Clara slipped the coat on. "I'm glad she's safe." She stepped out into the snow. It had slowed, but it was still falling. She started down the steps. "Clara," she turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm light of his home, and for just a moment he looked like he wanted to say something important, something that mattered. But he just said, "Be careful." Clara nodded, got into the car, watched the mansion disappear behind her. She didn't know that in 3 days, Ethan Prescott would track her down. She didn't know that Ruby would refuse to stop talking about the snow angel. She didn't know that she'd just walked into a life that would break her, heal her, and teach her what it meant to be chosen. All she knew was that her hands were finally warm, and for tonight, that was enough. 3 days later, Clara was folding sheets in the industrial dryer room when her supervisor tapped her shoulder. "Someone's here for you," Maria said, eyebrows raised. "In the lobby. Says it's important." Clara's stomach dropped. No one ever came for her. Not here. Not anywhere. She wiped her hands on her scrubs and walked through the maze of hallways to the hospital's service entrance lobby. And there, standing near the doors with a little girl holding his hand, was Ethan Prescott. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe. Ruby stood beside him in a purple dress with tights and small boots, clutching that same stuffed rabbit. When she saw Clara, her face lit up like Christmas morning. "The snow angel!" Ruby pulled free from her father's hand and ran straight to Clara, wrapping her arms around Clara's legs. Clara stood frozen, hands hovering uncertainly over the child's curls. She looked up at Ethan. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Hi," she said stupidly. "Hi." He took a few steps closer. "I'm sorry to show up at your work. I hope I'm not getting you in trouble." "No, it's fine. Is Ruby okay?" "She's perfect, thanks to you." He paused, seemed to be gathering words. "I wanted to thank you properly. The other night I was in shock. I didn't. He stopped, started again. Would you have dinner with us? Tomorrow night. Please. Ruby's been asking about you nonstop. Clara looked down at the little girl still hugging her legs. Ruby tilted her head back, hazel eyes pleading. Please come, Ruby said. Daddy makes really good pasta. And I want to show you my room, and my drawings, and Mr. Floppy. She held up the rabbit. This is Mr. Floppy. You saved him too. Clara's throat tightened. She should say no. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. But Ruby was looking at her like Clara had hung the moon, and Ethan's expression held something that looked almost like hope. Okay, Clara heard herself say. Tomorrow night. Ethan's shoulders relaxed. 6 o'clock? I'll send a car for you. I can take the bus. Clara. His voice was gentle but firm. Please, let me send a car. She nodded, gave him her address, cheeks burning with shame at the thought of a luxury car pulling up to her rundown building. Ruby hugged her one more time, then skipped back to her father. As they left, Ruby turned and waved with her whole arm. Clara waved back, and when she returned to the dryer room, Maria was grinning. Girl, Maria said, that man looked at you like you were water and he'd been crawling through a desert. He's just being nice. I helped his daughter. Mm-hmm. Keep telling yourself that. Clara did. All through her shift, all through the next day. She told herself it was just a thank you dinner. Nothing more. But she still spent an hour that evening trying to find something decent to wear. She settled on a simple navy dress she'd bought at Goodwill 2 years ago. It was clean, modest. It would have to do. The car arrived at 5:45. The driver held the door open for her like she was someone important. Clara slid into the leather seats and tried not to feel like an imposter. When they pulled up to the Prescott mansion, the front door opened before Clara could knock. Ruby stood there in pajamas covered in stars, jumping up and down. You came! You came! Daddy said you'd come, but I thought maybe you wouldn't because sometimes grown-ups say things and then they don't do them, but you did. Ethan appeared behind his daughter, lifting her gently by the waist. Ruby, let Clara come inside first before you tackle her. He'd changed out of the suit into dark jeans and a gray Henley that made his eyes look even greener. His hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked softer than he had at the hospital, more real. Come in, he said, and his smile was small but genuine. Dinner's almost ready. The house smelled like garlic and herbs and something baking. Clara followed them through the grand entryway into a kitchen that belonged in a cooking show. All marble counters and professional appliances and warm pendant lighting. A pot of pasta bubbled on the stove. Fresh bread cooled on a cutting board. You really did cook, Clara said, surprised. Ethan glanced at her. I said I would. Most people order in and pretend. I'm not most people. He stirred the sauce, tasted it, added a pinch of salt. And I like cooking. It's one of the few things that quiets my brain. Ruby climbed onto a stool at the kitchen island and patted the seat next to her. Clara sat. Ruby immediately launched into a detailed explanation of every drawing stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. Most were of stick figures. Some were of animals that might have been cats or dogs or possibly dragons. That one's you, Ruby said, pointing to a figure with yellow scribbles for hair and a big smile. You're the snow angel. See the wings? Clara looked closer. Sure enough, there were 2 blue shapes behind the figure that could be wings. Her chest felt too tight. It's beautiful, she whispered. Ethan served dinner at a table near the windows overlooking the back garden. Snow still blanketed everything, turning the world into something from a fairy tale. He'd set 3 places, and he put Clara across from him, Ruby between them at the corner. The pasta was perfect. The sauce was rich and savory. The bread was still warm. Clara tried to eat slowly, tried not to show how good it was, how long it had been since she'd had a real meal that didn't come from a microwave or a diner. But Ethan noticed. He watched her the way someone watches a puzzle they're trying to solve. Would you like more? He asked when her plate was empty. I shouldn't. There's plenty. He was already standing, reaching for her plate. Please. I made too much. He hadn't made too much. But Clara was still hungry, so she nodded. He served her another portion, generous and without hesitation, and when he sat back down, Ruby reached over and patted Clara's hand. You eat like you're really hungry, Ruby said, with the blunt honesty of small children. Are you hungry a lot, Ruby? Ethan said quietly. It's okay, Clara said. She looked at the little girl. Sometimes, but this is the best pasta I've ever had, so I want to enjoy every bite. Ruby seemed satisfied with this answer. She returned to her own plate, which had more sauce on the table around it than actually in her mouth. After dinner, Ruby insisted on showing Clara her room. It was a princess dream. Soft pink walls, a canopy bed with gauzy curtains, shelves overflowing with books and toys. But what caught Clara's attention was the wall across from the bed. Photographs. Dozens of them. Ruby as a baby. Ruby learning to walk. Ruby laughing. And in almost every single one, there was a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes and a smile that could light up the world. Natalie. That's my mommy, Ruby said, following Clara's gaze. She's in heaven now. Daddy says she watches me from up there. She pointed at the ceiling. Do you think she can see me? Clara's throat closed. I think if heaven is real, she never takes her eyes off you. Ruby considered this. Then she climbed onto her bed and pulled out a drawing from under her pillow. I made this today. It's for you. She held it out. Clara took it with trembling hands. It was a drawing of 3 people holding hands. On the left, a tall figure in brown. In the middle, a small figure in purple. On the right, a figure with yellow hair and a smile. Above them, Ruby had written in careful letters, My family. That's Daddy, Ruby said, pointing. That's me, and that's you. Clara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She looked at this drawing of a family she wasn't part of, a family she had no right to even imagine belonging to, and something inside her splintered. Ruby, do you like it? I love it, Clara whispered, because she did, and because it hurt. Ethan appeared in the doorway. Bath time, sweetheart. Can Clara read me a story after? If she wants to. Ruby looked at Clara with those huge, hopeful eyes. Clara nodded. She couldn't have said no if her life depended on it. While Ethan bathed Ruby, Clara waited in the hallway staring at the photographs lining the walls. More of Natalie. Natalie laughing at a beach. Natalie in a wedding dress. Natalie holding a newborn Ruby with a look of such fierce love that Clara had to look away. She wasn't this woman. Would never be this woman. She was just the discount version fate had cruelly designed to remind a grieving man of everything he'd lost. You're doing it again, Ethan's voice said from behind her. Clara turned. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching her with that same intense focus. Doing what? Looking at her pictures like you're apologizing for existing. Clara's cheeks flushed. I'm not. You are. He took a step closer. Clara, I need to explain something. When you showed up that night, I saw Natalie. For about 3 seconds, I saw my wife standing on my doorstep with my daughter in her arms, and I thought I'd lost my mind. He paused, but then I actually looked at you. And you're not her. I know that. Do you? He studied her face. Because you keep staring at her photos like you're trying to figure out how to become her. And that's not... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. That's not what this is. Then what is this? The question hung between them. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. Footsteps pattered down the hall. I'm ready, Ruby called, appearing in princess pajamas, hair damp and curling. The moment broke. Ethan stepped back. Clara followed Ruby to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and read 3 stories about brave princesses and friendly dragons. Ruby's eyes grew heavy halfway through the 3rd. By the end, she was asleep, Mr. Floppy tucked under her chin. Clara stood carefully, tucking the blanket around the little girl. She couldn't help herself. She brushed a curl back from Ruby's forehead, the gesture so natural it scared her. When she turned, Ethan was leaning against the doorframe, watching. Something in his expression made her heart stutter. He followed her downstairs. In the kitchen, he poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. They stood on opposite sides of the island, the silence stretching between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. I have a proposition, Ethan said finally. Clara's stomach tightened. Okay. I fired the babysitter, obviously, and I need someone to watch Ruby. Someone I trust. Someone she... He paused. Someone she's already attached to. You want me to babysit? I want to offer you a job. Full-time nanny. You'd live here, have your own room. Salary is $75,000 a year plus benefits. Clara's coffee mug nearly slipped from her hands. $75,000. That was more than 3 times what she made now. That was nursing school paid for. That was stability, security, a life. Why? She whispered. Because Ruby hasn't smiled like she did tonight since before Natalie died. Because you walked through a blizzard for a child you didn't know. Because... He stopped. His jaw worked. Because I trust you. You don't know me. I know enough. Clara shook her head. You're only offering because I look like her. No. His voice was sharp, almost angry. I'm offering because my daughter smiles again. Because she slept through the night for the first time in 3 years after you found her. Because when I watch you with her, I see someone who genuinely cares, not someone playing a role. He set down his mug, gripped the edge of the counter. I'm offering because you're good, and we need good. Clara wanted to say yes, wanted it so badly her teeth ached with it. But fear wrapped around her throat like a fist. What if, her voice cracked, what if Ruby gets too attached and I have to leave? What if I'm not what you need? What if... We'll have a trial period, Ethan said. 1 month. If it's not working for any of us, we revisit. No hard feelings. But Clara... He looked at her, really looked at her, and she felt seen in a way she'd never experienced. I don't think you're going to want to leave, and I don't think we're going to want you to. She should say no, should protect herself, should remember that fairy tales weren't real and people like her didn't get to live in mansions and be part of families. But then she remembered Ruby's drawing. The 3 figures holding hands, the word family. 1 month, she heard herself say. Trial period. Ethan's exhale was audible. 1 month. They shook hands across the island, and Clara felt the warmth of his palm against hers, the calluses that spoke of someone who did more than sign papers. And when he smiled, really smiled, the grief in his face receded just enough for her to see the man he might have been before loss carved him, hollow. When can you start? He asked. I need to give 2 weeks' notice at the hospital. I'll double your salary for those 2 weeks if you can start Monday. Clara stared at him. You don't have to. I want to. Please. She thought of the laundry room, the endless sheets, the ache in her shoulders. Maria would understand. And this was a chance at something more. Monday, she agreed. She moved in 3 days later with a single suitcase and a garbage bag of extra clothes. Ethan gave her a room on the 2nd floor, down the hall from Ruby's. It had a queen bed with a real mattress, not the lumpy futon she'd been sleeping on for years. A private bathroom, a window overlooking the garden, a desk with a lamp. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and cried, not from sadness, from the overwhelming terror of hope. The first week passed in a blur of routine. Clara woke early, made breakfast for Ruby. Ethan was usually already in his home office, on calls before the sun fully rose. Clara walked Ruby to pre-K, picked her up, helped with crafts and snacks and playtime. They went to the park when it wasn't too cold, read stories, sang songs. In the evenings, the 3 of them ate dinner together. Ethan started coming home earlier, first at 6:30, then 6, then 5:45, like he couldn't quite help himself. He'd appear in the kitchen while Clara was cooking. She'd taken over that duty, unable to let him work all day and then make dinner, and he'd lean against the counter with a glass of wine, asking about her day, about Ruby, sometimes just about Clara herself. She learned that he'd built his company from nothing, that he'd met Natalie in college, that they'd been happy, genuinely happy, until a patch of ice and a semi-truck took her away in the space of a heartbeat. I was in a meeting, Ethan said one night, staring into his wine. She was picking up Ruby from daycare. I'd promised I'd do it, but I had this call with investors and I asked her to go instead. His voice went flat. If I'd just kept my promise, she'd still be here. Clara's chest ached. It wasn't your fault. Logically, I know that. But logic doesn't change the fact that I chose work over my family and my wife paid the price. Is that why you come home early now? He looked at her surprised. Yes. Then maybe something good came from something terrible. She stirred the pasta sauce. Maybe Natalie would be glad you learned that lesson, even though the cost was too high. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, she would have liked you. Clara's hand stilled on the spoon. You don't know that. I do. She always said the best people were the ones who'd survived the worst things. She'd have recognized that in you. Clara didn't know what to say. So she just served dinner and they ate together, and Ruby chattered about her day, and for a little while it felt almost like a real family. 2 weeks in, Ruby started calling Clara Miss Clara with a reverence that made Clara's heart hurt. 3 weeks in, Clara walked by Ethan's study late one night and heard him on the phone. His voice was low, rough with emotion. "I know, Mom. I know it looks like her, but she's not. It's not like that. Ruby needs stability. That's all this is." A pause. "I'm not replacing Natalie. No one could replace Natalie." Clara pressed her hand to her chest and walked quickly back to her room. She sat on her bed in the dark, Ruby's drawing of their family taped to the wall above her desk, and reminded herself that this wasn't real. This was a job. These weren't her people. But Ruby had started reaching for her hand automatically when they crossed streets, had started saying, "I love you" at bedtime, had started drawing pictures where Clara stood between her and Ethan, holding both their hands, and Ethan had started looking at her in a way that made her skin feel too tight, not like she was Natalie, like she was Clara, and that was somehow more dangerous. The trial month was almost over when everything shifted. It was a Saturday morning. Clara was making pancakes while Ruby sat at the island, coloring. Ethan came down in jeans and a t-shirt, hair still messy from sleep. He poured coffee, leaned against the counter, watched Clara flip pancakes with a small smile. "You didn't have to cook," he said. "It's your day off." "I wanted to." Ruby looked up from her drawing. "Miss Clara, can we go to the park today?" "If the weather's nice." "Can Daddy come too?" Clara glanced at Ethan. He raised his eyebrows, the question implicit. She nodded. "Daddy can come," she said. Ruby cheered. Ethan's smile widened. They went to Boston Common after breakfast. Ruby ran ahead to the playground, and Clara and Ethan followed at a slower pace, hands shoved in their coat pockets, breath misting in the cold air. "She's happier," Ethan said. "Haven't you noticed? She laughs more, has fewer nightmares. Maybe she's just growing up." "No, it's you." He looked at her. "You're good for her, Clara. I'm just doing my job." "Is that really all this is to you? A job?" Clara's heart hammered. She couldn't answer. Because no, it wasn't just a job. It hadn't been for weeks. But admitting that meant admitting she'd let herself care, let herself imagine, let herself hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing a girl like her could carry. Ruby called for them to watch her go down the slide. They stood side by side, clapping and cheering. Ruby waved from the top, grinning so wide her whole face scrunched up. And then she said it, loud enough for half the playground to hear. "Daddy, can Miss Clara be my new mom?" The world stopped. Parents on nearby benches turned to look. Clara's face went hot. Ethan froze beside her. Ruby climbed down from the slide and ran over, oblivious to the sudden tension. "Can she, Daddy?" "I know Mommy's in heaven, but Miss Clara's here, and I love her, and she makes you smile. Can she stay forever and be my mom? Please?" Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She looked at Ethan and saw her own panic reflected back at her. "Ruby," he said carefully, it's more complicated than—" "Why?" Ruby's lower lip started to tremble. "Don't you want her to stay?" Ethan looked at Clara. His expression was helpless, lost. Clara knelt down, taking Ruby's small hands in hers. "Sweetheart, I love being with you so much. But being a mom is different. But you do mom things," Ruby insisted. "You make me breakfast. You read me stories. You hug me when I'm sad. That's what moms do." Clara's vision blurred. "Those are things people who love you do, and I do love you. But your daddy and we're not." She couldn't finish. Couldn't explain to a 4-year-old that she was just the help, that this wasn't her family, that she was always going to be on the outside looking in. Ethan cleared his throat. "Let's go home," he said quietly. "We can talk about this later." The ride home was silent. Ruby fell asleep in her car seat. Clara stared out the window, her chest so tight she thought her ribs might crack. When they got back to the mansion, Ethan carried Ruby inside. Clara went straight to her room and closed the door. She sat on her bed, Ruby's drawing staring at her from the wall, and knew with sudden, terrible clarity that she couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't keep pretending this was just a job. Couldn't keep lying to herself that she hadn't fallen in love with this little girl. Couldn't keep ignoring the way her heart jumped every time Ethan smiled at her. She was in too deep, and when this inevitably ended, because it would end, it had to end, she was going to shatter. Better to leave now, before Ruby got more attached, before Clara completely lost herself. She pulled out her suitcase and started to pack. Clara had 3 shirts folded in her suitcase when the knock came. "Clara?" Ethan's voice. Quiet, careful. "Can we talk?" She wiped her eyes quickly. "I'm busy. Please." She opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still in his coat from the park, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. His gaze went immediately to the open suitcase on her bed, his face drained of color. "You're leaving. I think it's best." "Best for who?" His voice cracked. "Ruby's asleep." She cried herself out, asking why you looked upset. She thinks she did something wrong. Clara's hands clenched into fists. "This isn't about Ruby." "Then what is it about?" "It's about the fact that I'm falling in love with a life that isn't mine." The words tore out of her before she could stop them. "It's about the fact that every time Ruby calls me Miss Clara like I'm someone special, my heart breaks a little more. It's about the fact that you look at me sometimes and I forget that I'm just the nanny who happens to have your dead wife's face." Ethan flinched like she'd slapped him. "That's not—" "Yes, it is." Clara's voice shook. "You hired me because I look like Natalie. Because Ruby needed someone, and I was close enough to the original. And I let myself forget that. I let myself pretend this was real. But it's not. It never was." "You're wrong." "Am I?" She gestured at the walls around them. "Look at this house, Ethan. Look at your life. I'm a 29-year-old woman who spent 2 weeks' salary on this dress, who didn't know what a real mattress felt like until I moved into this room, who grew up in foster care and aged out with $300 and a garbage bag of clothes." Her voice broke. "You live in a different world. Ruby deserves better than someone like me pretending to be her mother." "Don't!" Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides. "Don't you dare say you're not good enough for her. You're the best thing that's happened to this family in 3 years. I'm not family. I'm staff." His jaw tightened. "Is that really what you think?" "It's what I know." They stared at each other, the space between them crackling with everything unsaid. Ethan's hands flexed at his sides like he wanted to reach for her but didn't know if he had the right. "1 month," he said finally. "That was the deal. The month is up tomorrow. Stay through tomorrow. Please. Let us say goodbye properly. Ruby deserves that much." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to leave now, rip the bandage off fast and brutal. But the thought of Ruby waking up to find her gone without explanation made her chest cave in. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "I'll stay through tomorrow." Ethan nodded stiffly and left. Clara finished packing through tears, then shoved the suitcase under the bed where Ruby wouldn't see it. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around her, memorizing the sounds, the creak of old pipes, the whisper of heat through vents, the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Around 2 in the morning, she heard soft footsteps. Then her door opened and Ruby padded in, dragging Mr. Floppy behind her. "Miss Clara?" Ruby's voice was small. "I had a bad dream." Clara's heart shattered. She lifted the blanket. "Come here, sweetheart." Ruby climbed into bed and curled against Clara's side, small and warm and trusting. Clara wrapped her arms around the little girl, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, committing it to memory. "Miss Clara," Ruby whispered after a moment. "Are you going away?" Clara's breath caught. "What makes you think that?" "You looked sad today." "Like how Daddy looked after Mommy went to heaven." Ruby tilted her head back, eyes luminous in the dark. "Are you going to heaven too?" "No, baby. I'm not going anywhere like that." "But you're going somewhere." Clara couldn't lie. "Not to this child. I might have to go soon. But it has nothing to do with you. You didn't do anything wrong. Is it because I asked if you could be my mom?" Ruby's voice wobbled. "I'm sorry. I just thought—" "Oh, Ruby." Clara held her tighter. "That was the most wonderful thing anyone's ever asked me. But being a mom is complicated, and your Daddy loves you." Clara's heart stopped. "Ruby, he does. He smiles different now, like how he smiled in the old pictures with Mommy, and he comes home early to see you. And yesterday I heard him tell Grandma on the phone that you were special." Ruby looked up at her. So if he loves you and I love you, why can't you stay? Clara couldn't answer. She just held Ruby until the little girl fell asleep, and then she lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling her heart break in slow motion. The next morning, Clara made breakfast like always, pancakes shaped like hearts. Ruby ate in silence, watching Clara with worried eyes. Ethan sat across from them, looking like he hadn't slept either. The doorbell rang at 9. Ethan frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone." He went to answer it. Voices drifted from the entryway, Ethan's low and tense, and a woman's sharp with anger. Clara's stomach dropped. She recognized that tone. "Ruby," she said carefully, "why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" "But, please, sweetheart." Ruby must have heard something in her voice because she nodded and scampered off. Clara stood, smoothing her hands down her jeans, and walked toward the voices. In the foyer, Ethan stood facing an elegant woman in her 60s. She wore a Chanel suit and pearls, her silver hair styled perfectly, her face a mask of controlled fury. Behind her stood a younger woman, maybe mid-30s, in equally expensive clothes. "I don't care what your reasons are," the older woman was saying. "This is inappropriate, disgraceful. How could you bring someone who looks like my daughter into this house?" Ethan's voice was ice. "Vivian, you need to leave." "Not until I've met this replacement you've hired." Clara's presence must have drawn their attention because both women turned to look at her. The older woman, Vivian, Natalie's mother, went absolutely still. Her face went white, then red. "My God," she breathed. "It's worse than I thought. She could be Natalie's twin." "She's nothing like Natalie," Ethan said sharply. "Exactly." Vivian's eyes raked over Clara with open contempt. "Natalie was educated, accomplished. She came from good family. She gestured at Clara. "This is what? A charity case you picked up and dressed in my daughter's face?" Clara's cheeks burned. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The younger woman stepped forward. "Mom, maybe we should—" "No, Rebecca. Your sister has been dead for 3 years, and he's already replaced her with someone who looks like her discount store version." Vivian turned back to Ethan. "Have you no respect for Natalie's memory? For what you had?" "I loved Natalie," Ethan said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I will always love Natalie, but she's gone, and Clara is not a replacement. She's what? Your daughter's new nanny? The woman you're clearly developing feelings for despite the fact that she's a walking reminder of everything you lost." "Stop it," Clara said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Just stop." Vivian's gaze snapped to her. "Excuse me?" "You're right," Clara said. "I'm nobody. I grew up in foster care. I wash hospital sheets for a living. I live in a studio apartment with mice and a radiator that doesn't work." Her voice shook, but she kept going. "I am nothing like your daughter. She was beautiful and educated and perfect, and I'm just me." "Clara," Ethan started. "No." She looked at him, tears threatening. "She's right. I've been fooling myself. I don't belong here. I don't belong with you or with Ruby. I'm just someone who happened to have the right face at the right time." Vivian's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been surprise. "At least you're self-aware." "I am." Clara turned back to Vivian. "But you're wrong about one thing. I would never try to replace your daughter. I couldn't if I tried. She was Ruby's mother. Nothing will ever change that. I was just—" Her voice cracked. "I was just keeping Ruby warm until she was old enough to understand what she lost." The words hung in the air. Vivian stared at her. Rebecca was openly crying. Ethan looked like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. "I'll go pack," Clara whispered, and turned toward the stairs. "Wait," Vivian said. Clara stopped, but didn't turn around. "What did you just say? About keeping her warm?" Clara's hands trembled. "Ruby asked me once why I saved her from the snow. I told her I was lost once as a child and no one came. No one stayed. I didn't want her to feel like that." She swallowed hard. "That's all I've ever been doing. Making sure she doesn't feel lost or cold or alone until she's old enough to carry her mother's memory without it crushing her." Silence. Then footsteps. Clara felt someone stop behind her. Vivian's voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "Turn around, please." Clara did. Vivian's eyes were wet. "You're not trying to replace her," Vivian said slowly, like she was realizing it for the first time. "No, ma'am. You just love them. Clara's composure cracked. So much it's killing me. Vivian looked at her for a long moment, then at Ethan, then back at Clara. I came here to tell you to leave, to protect my daughter's memory. But Natalie, her voice broke. Natalie wrote me a letter before she died. I found it last month. She'd hidden it in a book she knew I'd eventually read. Ethan straightened. What? Rebecca pulled an envelope from her purse and handed it to Vivian. Vivian opened it with shaking hands and began to read aloud. Mom, if you're reading this, something happened to me. I need you to do something for me. I need you to let Ethan live. She paused, tears sliding down her cheeks. I know you. I know you'll want to preserve my memory, keep everything exactly as it was, make sure Ruby remembers me. But Mom, don't let Ethan stop living because of that. Don't let Ruby grow up without a mother's love because you're holding on to a ghost. Vivian's voice wavered, but she continued. If Ethan finds someone kind who sees Ruby for who she is, someone who makes him smile again, let her in, even if it hurts. Even if you think she's not good enough or not like me, let her in, because Ruby deserves to have a mom who's there, not just one in heaven. And Ethan deserves to love again. That's not betrayal. That's life. Please, Mom, let them live. The last words dissolved into a sob. Vivian pressed the letter to her chest, shoulders shaking. Clara couldn't breathe. Ethan had gone completely still. Rebecca moved to her mother's side, rubbing her back. We came here to drive you away, she said to Clara. But that letter, Mom only showed it to me last night. We've been up all night arguing about it. Natalie was right, Vivian said, lowering the letter. She looked at Clara with red-rimmed eyes. She was always right. I've been so focused on keeping her alive in memory that I've been killing the people she loved most. She took a shaky breath. I'm sorry for what I said, for what I thought. You're not what I accused you of being. I should still go, Clara whispered. Why? Ethan's voice was rough. He crossed to her, stopping just inches away. Why should you go? Because I can't do this, Ethan. I can't stay here and love Ruby and watch you struggle with whether you can love me back without feeling like you're betraying Natalie. I can't be the question mark hanging over this family. You're not a question mark. He reached up, hesitated, then cupped her face with both hands. You're the answer. Don't you see that? You're what we've been missing. What I've been missing. I'm not her. I know. His thumbs brushed away her tears. And I don't want you to be. I want you to be Clara, the woman who walked through a blizzard, who makes terrible jokes when Ruby's scared, who sings off-key in the kitchen when she thinks no one's listening, who cried when Ruby called her Miss Clara for the first time. His voice dropped to a whisper. The woman I'm falling in love with. Clara's breath stopped. You can't. I can. I am. I have been for weeks, and it's terrified me, because I thought it meant I was letting Natalie go. But Vivian's right. Natalie wouldn't want us frozen. She'd want us to live. Footsteps on the stairs. Daddy? They all turned. Ruby stood on the landing in her pajamas, eyes huge, mister, floppy trailing from one hand. She must have heard everything. Is Miss Clara leaving? Ruby's voice was very small. Clara's heart shattered. She pulled away from Ethan, crossed to the stairs, and knelt at the bottom, eye level with the little girl. Ruby, please don't go. Ruby came down the stairs slowly. I don't care if you're not really my mom. I don't care if you're just the nanny. I don't care about any of that. She reached Clara and threw her arms around her neck. I just want you to stay. Please, Miss Clara, please don't leave me like Mommy did. The plea broke something fundamental in Clara's chest. She wrapped her arms around Ruby and held on like she was the only real thing in the world. I'm not leaving, she heard herself say. I'm not leaving, baby. I promise. Ruby pulled back, tears streaming down her face. Really? Clara looked up at Ethan, found him watching her with an expression that held so much hope it hurt to look at directly. Found Vivian nodding slightly, Rebecca smiling through her own tears. Really? Clara whispered. Ruby launched herself back into Clara's arms. Clara held her, rocking slightly, and felt Ethan's hand come to rest on her shoulder. Warm, steady, real. I'm sorry, Vivian said softly. To all of you, I was wrong. Clara... She waited until Clara looked at her. Will you forgive an old woman for being cruel? Clara nodded, unable to speak. Vivian took a breath. Natalie would have liked you. She always said the best people were survivors. And you, her voice gentled. You survived and still stayed kind. That's rare. Rebecca stepped forward and held out her hand. I'm Rebecca, Natalie's sister. I'd like to start over if that's okay. Clara shifted Ruby to one hip and shook Rebecca's hand. I'd like that. The women left soon after, but the air in the house had changed, lightened, like something that had been holding its breath finally exhaled. Ruby refused to let go of Clara for the rest of the day. She sat in Clara's lap during lunch, held her hand during nap time, insisted Clara sit next to her during every activity, as if afraid that if she looked away, Clara might disappear. That evening, after Ruby was in bed, Clara stood in her room staring at the half-packed suitcase. Ethan appeared in the doorway. You really meant it? He asked quietly. You'll stay? I don't know how not to, Clara admitted. I tried to leave and I couldn't. The thought of not being here, not seeing Ruby, She stopped, looked at him. Not seeing you. He crossed the room, stopped in front of her. I meant what I said earlier. I'm falling in love with you. Not because you look like Natalie, because you're nothing like her, and that's perfect. Clara's eyes burned. I'm scared. So am I. He took her hand. But maybe we can be scared together. Maybe that's better than being alone. Clara looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd lost everything and somehow found the courage to risk his heart again, at this life she'd stumbled into by accident and couldn't bear to leave. Okay, she whispered. Together. Ethan smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes completely. No shadow of grief, no ghost of guilt, just light, just possibility, just hope. 3 months passed, like a held breath slowly released. Clara unpacked her suitcase, put her clothes in the dresser, hung Ruby's drawings on her walls, stopped calling it the guest room and started calling it my room. The shifts were subtle but profound. Ethan started leaving for work later, coming home earlier. Some mornings, Clara would come downstairs to find him already in the kitchen, making coffee, waiting for her with a smile that said good morning without word. Ruby stopped having nightmares, started sleeping through the night. Her laughter became a constant soundtrack in the house, bright and unguarded. Vivian visited twice a week. She brought photo albums of Natalie and sat with Ruby telling her stories about her mother. But she also stayed for dinner, talked with Clara about nursing school. Once, she hugged Clara goodbye and whispered, "Thank you for loving them." Rebecca became a friend. She'd call Clara for lunch, take her shopping, introduce her to Natalie's old friends. "They need to know you," Rebecca said. "They need to see that you're not trying to erase her." And slowly, painfully, beautifully, Clara stopped feeling like an imposter. She enrolled in nursing school. Ethan insisted on paying, and this time, Clara let him. She studied at the kitchen table while Ruby colored beside her. Ethan would come home and quiz her on anatomy, making terrible jokes about bones that made Ruby giggle. They fell into rhythms. Movie nights on Fridays with popcorn and Ruby between them on the couch. Pancake breakfasts on Sundays. Walks in the park when the weather allowed. Ruby held both their hands now, swinging between them, and Clara's heart no longer clenched with guilt at the picture they made. But Ethan kept his distance. He was warm, affectionate in safe ways, a hand on her shoulder, a smile across the table, but he never crossed the line he'd drawn when he first said he was falling in love with her. Clara understood. He was giving her space to be sure, giving himself time to be certain this was real, and not just a desperate man clinging to a ghost in a different package. She could wait. She'd waited her whole life to belong somewhere. She could wait a little longer. The shift came on a Tuesday in April. Clara was studying for a practical exam, spread out across the kitchen table with anatomy charts and flashcards. Ruby was at a play date. Ethan had taken the afternoon off, something he'd been doing more often lately, and was working in his study. The doorbell rang. Clara looked up, frowning. They weren't expecting anyone. She opened the door to find a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of flowers, tulips, her favorite. She'd mentioned it once, months ago, in passing. "Clara Bennett?" the man asked. "Yes? These are for you." He handed them over and left. Clara carried the vase to the kitchen, her heart beating strangely. There was a card tucked among the stems. She opened it with shaking fingers. "Congratulations on your exam. You're going to be an incredible nurse." Her exam was Friday. He'd remembered, and he'd sent flowers 3 days early, so she'd have them while she studied. Clara pressed the card to her chest, eyes stinging. She turned to put the flowers on the table and found Ethan standing in the doorway, watching her. "You remembered," she said softly. "I remember everything you tell me." They looked at each other across the kitchen. The air between them felt charged, delicate, like touching it wrong might shatter something precious. "Ethan, come with me," he said. "There's something I want to show you." He led her upstairs to the 3rd floor. Clara had never been up here. Ethan opened a door at the end of the hall, and Clara stepped into a room that made her breath catch. It was a studio. Huge windows flooded the space with natural light. There was a desk, a bookshelf, a comfortable chair, and on every surface, nursing textbooks, study guides, medical equipment for practice, even a skeleton model for anatomy studies. "What is this?" Clara whispered. "Your study space." Ethan's voice was quiet. "I know you've been using the kitchen table, but I thought you deserve somewhere that's just yours, where you can focus, where you don't have to clean up your notes every time Ruby wants to color." Clara walked slowly into the room, trailing her fingers over the desk. Everything was perfect, organized, chosen specifically for her needs. "When did you—" "I've been working on it for a month. Vivian helped, and Rebecca." He came to stand beside her. "I wanted you to have a place in this house that was undeniably yours. Not the guest room we call yours, not the kitchen we all share, just yours." Clara's vision blurred. "Ethan, I can't. This is too much." "It's not enough." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her knees weak. "Clara, I need to say something. I've been holding back because I wanted to be sure, wanted to make sure this wasn't grief or guilt or some twisted need to replace what I lost. But I'm sure now." He took her hands. "I'm completely, terrifyingly sure." "Sure of what?" "That I love you." His voice dropped to something raw and honest. "Not because you look like Natalie, not because Ruby loves you, not because you fill a hole in our lives. I love you because you're Clara, because you sing off-key, because you make terrible puns that Ruby thinks are hilarious, because you cry at commercials and eat ice cream straight from the carton at midnight when you think no one's watching." Clara laughed through her tears. "You've seen that?" "I've seen everything." His thumbs brushed over her knuckles. "I've seen how you sacrifice, how you give without expecting anything back, how you love with your whole heart even though life has given you every reason not to." He swallowed hard. "You make me want to be better. You make me want to live again, really live, not just exist. And I know it's fast, I know we're still figuring this out, but Clara," his voice cracked, "I don't want to figure it out from a distance anymore. I don't want to keep pretending I'm just your employer or Ruby's father or anything other than a man who is completely, desperately in love with you." Clara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stand there with tears streaming down her face as this man, this good, broken, healing man, laid his heart at her feet. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Ethan continued quickly. "Not yet, but I'm asking—" He took a shaky breath. "I'm asking if you can see a future here, not as the nanny, not as the woman who looks like my wife, but as yourself, as Clara, as the woman I want to build a life with." "Yes," the word tore out of her. "Yes, Ethan. God, yes." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. Maybe he had been. "Yeah, I love you too." Clara stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I've loved you for so long I can't remember when it started. I was so scared. I thought you'd wake up one day and realize I'm not her. I'm not anything like her, and you'd—" "Stop." He cupped her face gently, the way he had that day in the foyer. "You're right. You're nothing like her. And that's why I love you. Natalie she was sunshine, bright and warm and effortless. You—" His voice softened. "You're starlight, quieter, harder to see sometimes, but constant, enduring, and just as beautiful." Clara's sob was half laugh, half cry. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." "Get used to it." Ethan smiled, and it transformed his face. "I have about 3 years of romance to make up for." He kissed her then, soft and careful and achingly tender. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious. Clara's arms came around his waist, and she let herself melt into him, into this moment she'd been too afraid to even dream about. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Ruby's going to lose her mind," he murmured. Clara laughed. "She's been planning this for months. She told me last week she's going to be the flower girl at our wedding. I told her we weren't getting married. She said, 'Not yet,' and went back to her coloring." He pulled back to look at Clara. She was right, as usual. "Not yet," Clara agreed. "But someday soon." They went downstairs hand in hand. When Ruby came home an hour later, she took one look at them, at how close they were standing, at their joined hands, at the way Ethan was looking at Clara, and screamed with joy. "Are you boyfriend and girlfriend now?" she demanded, bouncing on her toes. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara nodded. "Yes," Ethan said. "Is that okay with you?" Ruby launched herself at both of them, wrapping her small arms around their legs. "I told you she should stay forever." "You were right, sweetheart," Clara said, kneeling down to Ruby's level. "You've been right about everything. Can I still call you Miss Clara?" Clara's throat tightened. "You can call me whatever you want." Ruby thought about this very seriously. Then she said, "Can I call you Clara, Mom?" Clara's eyes met Ethan's. His were wet, too. Ruby, I don't want to replace your mommy." "You're not," Ruby said with the simple clarity of a child who understands more than adults give her credit for. "Mommy's my heaven mom. You're my here mom. I can have both, right?" Clara couldn't speak, could only nod as tears poured down her face. "Is that a yes?" Ruby asked anxiously. "That's a yes," Clara managed. Ruby cheered. "Clara Mom? I have a Clara Mom now." That night, after Ruby was in bed, after she'd insisted Clara Mom read her 3 stories and sing 2 songs, Clara and Ethan sat on the couch in the living room. He had his arm around her. She leaned into him, fitting against his side like she'd been designed for exactly this space. "Are you scared?" Ethan asked quietly. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "Me too." He kissed the top of her head. "But the good kind of scared, the kind that means something real is happening." Clara tilted her head back to look at him. "I never thought I'd have this. A family, a home, someone who—" Her voice caught. "Someone who chose me. I'll choose you every day," Ethan promised. "For as long as you'll let me. That's going to be a really long time." "Good." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low in the hearth. After a while, Clara spoke again. "I want to visit her grave, Natalie's. I need to tell her something." Ethan stiffened slightly, then relaxed. "Okay. When?" "Soon. Before Ruby's birthday next month." Clara looked up at him. "Will you come with me?" "If you want me to." "I do." 3 days later, Clara stood in front of Natalie Prescott's grave with Ethan beside her and Ruby holding her hand. The headstone was beautiful, simple marble with Natalie's name, her dates, and an inscription, "Beloved wife, mother, light." Clara had brought flowers, white roses. She knelt and placed them at the base of the stone. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Clara. I think you know that already. Somehow." She took a breath. "I'm in love with your husband and your daughter, and I wanted you to know I'm not trying to replace you. I couldn't if I tried." "You were—" Her voice shook. "You were everything to them? You still are." Ruby squeezed her hand. Clara continued. "But I'm going to love them too. I'm going to love them with everything I have. I'm going to be there for Ruby's first day of kindergarten and her dance recitals and her heartbreaks. I'm going to make sure she knows about you, knows how much you loved her. I'm going to—" A sob broke through. "I'm going to take care of them. I promise. I promise I'll take care of them." The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves in the trees overhead. Ruby stepped forward and placed her small hand on the headstone. "I love you, Mommy," she said. "And I love Clara Mom too. Is that okay?" No one answered, but somehow in the quiet, it felt like permission had been given. Ethan's hand found Clara's shoulder. His voice was rough when he spoke. "Thank you, Natalie, for everything, for Ruby, for—" He stopped, swallowed. "For the letter, for understanding, for—" His voice broke. "For letting us live." They stood there for a long time, the 3 of them, paying respects to the woman who'd brought them together even in her absence. When they finally left, Ruby walked between them, holding both their hands, and Clara didn't feel like an interloper anymore. She felt like exactly what she was, part of a family that had been broken and was slowly, carefully being rebuilt into something new, not a replacement, an addition. 6 months later, on a December evening 1 year after Clara had first walked through a blizzard carrying a frozen child, Ethan took her back to that same park. Snow was falling. Not a blizzard this time, just gentle flakes drifting down like blessings. Ruby was with Vivian, having a grandma night that had been suspiciously well planned. "Do you remember?" Ethan asked, stopping in the middle of the path where they'd been standing when Ruby first asked if Clara could be her mom. "Every second," Clara said. He turned to face her, and she saw him reach into his coat pocket. Her heart stopped. "I said I wasn't asking you to marry me yet," Ethan said. "But it turns out, yet came faster than I thought." He pulled out a small velvet box. "Clara Bennett, you saved my daughter's life. You saved my life. You taught us both how to live again, how to love again, how to be a family again." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a single diamond that caught the lamplight. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life choosing you?" Clara was crying again. Always crying around this man, but for all the right reasons now. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Ethan. Always yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and then he kissed her in the falling snow, and Clara thought about that night a year ago, about how she'd been freezing and alone and convinced she'd never be anything more than a ghost in her own life. And now she was here, engaged, loved, home. "Get in," Ethan said when they finally pulled apart, gesturing toward the car waiting nearby. "Let me take you home." Clara smiled through her tears. "I am home," she said. "Wherever you and Ruby are, that's home." But she let him lead her to the car anyway. Let him hold her hand the whole way back to the mansion that had once felt like a fairy tale she was only visiting. Now it was just home. When they walked through the door, Ruby came running, shrieking with excitement, because Vivian had clearly told her what was happening. "You said yes? You said yes!" Ruby jumped up and down. "I'm going to be a flower girl. I told you, Daddy. I told you she'd say yes." "You were right," Ethan said, scooping his daughter up. "You've been right about everything, little one." Ruby beamed. Then she looked at Clara, eyes shining. "Does this mean you're really going to be my mom now? Like, officially?" Clara knelt down so they were eye to eye. "If you'll have me, forever and ever, forever and ever." Ruby threw her arms around Clara's neck. "Best snow angel ever," she whispered. Clara held her tight, this little girl who'd brought her in from the cold. This little girl who'd saved her just as much as she'd saved Ruby. Later, after Ruby was asleep, Clara stood in her study, the room Ethan had built for her, and looked at the picture Ruby had drawn months ago. The 3 stick figures holding hands. My family. She'd been so scared of that picture once, scared of wanting it too much, scared of it not being real. Now she pulled it down, carefully placed it in a frame, and put it on her desk. Because it was real. She was Clara Bennett, soon to be Clara Prescott, former foster kid, former laundry worker, future nurse, and forever member of this family she'd accidentally walked into through a blizzard. She wasn't a replacement. She wasn't second best. She wasn't a discount version of someone else. She was just Clara. And for the first time in her entire life, that was more than enough. It was everything.